My father squeezed my hand in the Black Friday crush, whispering, "Stay close, but out back, by the humming loading docks." My stepmother's grip was iron on my arm. Her smile was a bright beacon for the shoppers. But her words were a venomous whisper only I could hear. 20 years later, I walked back into that same retail empire, not as a scared child, but as a manager with a plan. They used the crowd for cover. I would use it for exposure. My name is Mara Quinn, at 32. My reflection is a stranger I meet only in the polished chrome and impersonal glass of corporate bathrooms. This one, on the 42nd floor of the Northline Retail Group Tower, is silent, except for the low hum of the air purification system. The light is a flat, unforgiving LED white, the kind that strips away any pretense. It's here, under this clinical glare, that I see it most clearly. A faint, silver thread of a scar tucked just behind my left ear, disappearing into my hairline, a relic. A receipt for a debt incurred when I was 12 years old. Most people never notice it. It's a ghost of an injury, a whisper of healed skin. But for me, it is an anchor, a permanent tether to a specific time and place. Coldwater Heights, the week of Thanksgiving, 2 decades ago. The memory doesn't arrive. It floods. It has a sound, a smell, a temperature. It smells of new plastic, cheap cinnamon potpourri, and the damp wool of 100 winter coats packed too tightly together. It sounds like the squeak and slide of shopping cart wheels on linoleum and the tinny, looping jingle of a forgotten Christmas carol. The sign above the entrance to the Northline-owned superstore, a brand since absorbed into the corporate monolith, flashed with a desperate, epileptic rhythm. Doorbusters 4. A.M. Doorbusters 4. A. The letters bled. A neon red glow into the pre-dawn darkness, a promise of salvation through consumption. Inside, the air was thick and hot, a biosphere of frantic bargain hunting. My father's hand was a vice around mine. Robert Quinn was a man who navigated the world with a forced, brittle cheerfulness, a flimsy shield against anything unpleasant. His mantra, repeated in a low, urgent murmur as we were jostled by the swelling crowd, was always the same. "Stay close, Mara, just stay close." As a child, I thought it was a plea for my safety. Don't get lost in the crush. Don't wander off. But I learned its true meaning. Stay close didn't mean stay near him. It meant stay quiet. Don't draw attention. Don't make a scene. Don't give my stepmother, Sable, a reason. Sable moved through the chaos like a shark in a feeding frenzy. Not because she wanted the deals, but because she thrived on the performance. Her public face was a masterpiece of warmth and curated compassion. She'd place a perfectly manicured hand on a fellow shopper's arm, her voice a confection of sugar and sympathy. "Oh, you simply must get the last one. I insist," she'd say, smiling a smile that never reached her cold, assessing eyes. And to me, if she caught my gaze wandering or my expression failing to reflect the appropriate holiday excitement, she'd lean in, her perfume cloying, and whisper through that same bright smile. "Smile now, kiddo. Don't be sullen. People are watching." The incident, the one that branded me with this silver scar, happened near the electronics section. A crush of people surged forward for a newly opened pallet of discounted televisions. I was small for my age, and the sudden wave of bodies knocked me off balance. I stumbled, bumping into the back of a woman's cart. Her purse, precariously perched, tumbled to the floor, its contents scattering like cheap confetti. It was nothing, an accident. The woman barely noticed. But Sable saw. She saw an imperfection in her carefully constructed family portrait. She saw a scene. Her hand shot out, her fingers closing around the fabric of my upper arm like a claw. "We need some air," she announced to my father. Her voice still light, still public. Robert just gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes already scanning a display of power tools. He didn't look at me. He was staying close, He was not making a scene. Sable propelled me through the throng, past the checkout lines, past the seasonal displays, towards a heavy gray metal door marked Staff Only. The air grew colder as we moved away from the heat of the crowd. The festive jingles faded, replaced by the dull hum of industrial refrigerators. She pushed the door open, and we were plunged into the frigid concrete reality of the loading dock area. The pre-dawn air was sharp and smelled of diesel exhaust and wet cardboard. The moment the door hissed shut behind us, the mask dissolved. The smile vanished. Her face, in the lonely glow of a single caged bulb overhead, was a landscape of cold fury. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous thing. She backed me against a stack of empty pallets, her body caging me in. Her grip on my coat tightened, twisting the fabric until the zipper dug sharply into the underside of my chin, making it hard to swallow. She leaned in close, her face inches from mine. I could see the tiny cracks in her foundation, the feral glint in her eyes. It wasn't a beating. It was something worse. It was a methodical dismantling of my personhood, a lesson in terror. "You are a clumsy, ungrateful child," she whispered, each word a perfectly enunciated icicle. "Robert and I give you everything, and you repay us by making a spectacle. Do you have any idea how that makes me look?" My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to twist away, to create some space, any space, between her suffocating presence and me. "I didn't mean to," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "You never mean to," she spat. "That's the problem." In my panic, I pushed back harder. My foot slipped on a patch of unseen ice. I fell backward, not forward, away from her, the side of my head connected with the razor-sharp corner of a steel loading bay frame. The impact was a sickening, metallic thud, followed by a searing, white-hot pain. I cried out, my hand flying to my ear. When I pulled it back, my fingertips were slick and dark with blood. Sable's eyes widened, but not with concern. It was annoyance. This was another mess she had to manage. She looked down at me, crumpled on the freezing concrete, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been panic in her eyes. Not for me, but for herself. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, hard mask of control. "Now look what you've done," she said, her voice flat. "You're so dramatic. You've hurt yourself." That was when the side door creaked open. A boy, not much older than me, maybe 16, stood silhouetted against the store's interior light. He wore an oversized, ill-fitting security uniform. He was small and wiry, with large, dark eyes that took in the scene with a shocking quickness. Sable standing over me, the blood on my hand, the tears freezing on my cheeks. He was holding 2 cans of soda. He took a hesitant step forward, his expression a mixture of fear and pity. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice cracking. He looked at me, then took another step, extending one of the cold cans. "Here," he said softly, for your head." His name was Theo. I didn't know it then, but I would never forget his face. It was the first act of unsolicited kindness I had received in years. I reached a trembling hand for the can. But before my fingers could touch the cold aluminum, Sable turned her head. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She simply looked at him. It was not a glare of anger. It was a look of complete and utter dismissal, a silent communication that conveyed to him exactly how insignificant he was, how easily he could be broken, how utterly he did not matter in her world. It was the look of a queen at a roach. Theo froze, his hand retracted as if burned. He swallowed hard, the flicker of bravery in his eyes extinguished. He mumbled an apology, turned, and vanished back inside the store, the door hissing shut, and leaving me once again alone in the cold with her. The satisfying, solid thunk of my ID card against the scanner at the Northline corporate headquarters brings me back, 20 years later. The sound is a world away from the hiss of that loading dock door. I push through the sleek, glass turnstile. The lobby is a cathedral of marble and brushed steel. a monument to the global retail machine I am now a part of. I am the newly promoted Director of Operational Risk Analysis. My job is to see the flaws in the system before they become catastrophic failures. I analyze data streams, stress test supply chains, and model crowd dynamics. I am paid to be paranoid, to find the single point of failure in a system designed to appear flawless. This year, my primary project is codenamed Q-Trace, a comprehensive overhaul of our Black Friday safety protocols. I'm the one responsible for safe queuing across our top-performing national stores. It's a job about control, about ensuring the chaotic energy of the crowd is channeled into predictable, profitable patterns, not into stampedes and lawsuits. In my office, surrounded by schematics and data-rich dashboards, I pull up the file for Store 347, Coldwater Heights, my hometown. The store is slated as a pilot location for the new system. My finger traces the lines on the digital blueprint, past the main entrance, past electronics, past the checkout counters. My nail stops on a small, gray rectangle at the back of the building, loading bay 3. I look out my window at the sprawling cityscape below. A tapestry of lights against the encroaching dusk, but I don't see the skyline. I see a single, caged bulb flickering over a patch of icy concrete. I feel the ghost of a zipper digging into my throat. I feel the memory of a cold can of soda I never got to hold. For 20 years, that back door has been a symbol of fear, a portal to a moment of profound helplessness. It was a place where truth was twisted and compassion was punished. But this year, I am the one in charge of the cameras. I am the one who writes the protocols. I am the one who monitors the doors. Black Friday is coming, a tidal wave of manufactured frenzy, and this time, when that back door opens, it will not be to swallow a scared child into the darkness. It will be to drag a dark secret into the light. That back door would open to something other than fear. That was a decision made not in anger, but with the cold, quiet clarity of an auditor signing off on a final report. Fear was a liability, an unmanaged risk. It was time to balance the books. My family lived in a glass house on Mapleview Hill. This was not a metaphor. It was an architectural statement, a modernist box of floor-to-ceiling windows cantilevered over the manicured lawns of Coldwater Heights. From the street, you could see straight through our lives. You could see the faux antique pottery sable arranged on floating shelves with surgical precision. You could see the art books on the coffee table, always open to a tastefully abstract page. And you could see the gallery wall in the main hall, a curated collection of professionally shot family portraits. In every single one, we were smiling. Perfect teeth, perfect clothes, perfect lighting, a perfect lie, framed in brushed chrome. Sable was the curator of this museum of domestic perfection. Her life's work was the elimination of any and all flaws. My father, Robert, was her prize exhibit, the self-made man. He owned Quinn Maintenance Solutions, a local success story. He was a member of the Chamber of Commerce. He sponsored a Little League team. The story, told over Chardonnay at neighborhood gatherings, was one of grit and entrepreneurial spirit. The truth was less inspiring. Quinn Maintenance Solutions had exactly one client. It was a holding company whose sole purpose was to service a sprawling, decade-long maintenance contract for every Northline retail location in the tri-state area. Robert wasn't a self-made man. He was a kept man, living comfortably on the crumbs from the corporate table, a golden leash Sable held tightly. His success was entirely dependent on Northline's goodwill, a fact that kept him pliable, compliant, and willfully blind. Their shared project of perfection required constant maintenance, and my existence was a persistent structural flaw. Any mention of the past, any suggestion that our gleaming glass house had a dark, cold cellar, was met with Sable's signature technique of psychological demolition. I once tried, years ago, during a college break. We were sitting on the white leather sofa, the afternoon sun streaming in, making dust motes dance like tiny, silent witnesses. I was thinking about when I was a kid, I began, my voice careful. That Black Friday, at the store. Sable didn't even look up from her magazine. She waved a dismissive, perfectly manicured hand. "Oh, Mara, don't be so dramatic. You were always such a sensitive child." A pause. She turned a page. "You need to let things go. It's unhealthy to dwell." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. My trauma was recast as a personality flaw. My memory was a symptom of being too sensitive, in public. She had another tool. If I seemed withdrawn at a family event, she would loop her arm through mine, pull me into her side, and say to whichever acquaintance was nearby, "You'll have to forgive my Mara. She's always in her own little world." Then she'd squeeze my arm, a gesture that looked like affection but felt like a warning, and call me the name she reserved for these public displays. Isn't that right, kiddo? Kiddo, a word that stripped me of my age, my career, my entire adult identity, reducing me to the clumsy, sullen child from her narrative. It was brilliant. It was suffocating. So I stopped trying. I left for good at 18. I did not take their money. I did not want their help. I signed the paperwork for student loans that felt like a mountain. And I moved into a cramped apartment that smelled of old paint and mildew, and for 3 years, to pay for my textbooks, I worked the night shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. at the very same Northline superstore in Coldwater Heights. I wore the blue polyester vest. I stocked shelves. I cleaned up spills in aisle 3. I learned the inventory system from the inside out. I watched the trucks arrive at the loading docks in the dead of night. I understood the flow of product, the mechanics of the machine, from its most granular level. Sable, of course, spun this into another chapter of her heroic maternal saga. My fierce bid for independence became a story of teenage rebellion. "Mara has always been so headstrong," she would tell relatives with a perfectly pitched sigh. "She has to do things the hard way. I suppose I admire her spirit. But Lord, it was terrifying for a mother to watch." The official family story was set in stone. Mara was the difficult, rebellious child. Sable was the patient, terrified mother who had tried her best. I never corrected them. I let the story stand. Arguing with Sable was like punching water. It was pointless and exhausting, and you only ended up looking foolish. My silence was not surrender. It was strategic. It was the patient, methodical gathering of intelligence. While they were busy polishing their narrative, I was studying their behavior. I listened. I watched. I let them believe they had won. Let them grow comfortable in their fiction. Their arrogance became my greatest asset. 5 years ago, Sable launched her masterpiece, her performance of a lifetime. She founded a charity, the Hands of Grace Foundation. Its mission was simple and unimpeachable. Every year, on the day before Black Friday, Hands of Grace would partner with Northline to collect new, donated goods, toys, clothes, non-perishables for the less fortunate families of Coldwater Heights. It was an immediate, stunning success. Sable was a natural. The local paper ran a full-page feature with a photo of her standing beside a mountain of donated teddy bears. Her expression one of beatific grace. She was no longer just Robert Quinn's elegant wife. She was a civic leader, a humanitarian. She became Saint Sable of Mapleview Hill, the charity fairy of Coldwater Heights. Her social status, already considerable, ascended into something untouchable. She was beyond reproach. I watched it all from a distance, with a growing sense of professional curiosity. The operation was too smooth. The publicity was too perfect. For Sable, charity wasn't about altruism. It was about branding. And if I knew anything about her, it was that she never, ever left the integrity of her brand to chance. My career at Northline had given me a new lens through which to see the world. I didn't see people anymore. I saw systems, processes, and potential points of failure. From my desk on the 42nd floor, I had access to databases and public records that would have been unthinkable to the girl stocking shelves a decade earlier. On a Tuesday afternoon, fueled by cold coffee and a hunch so strong it felt like a certainty, I began to dig. All registered nonprofits have to file tax documents with the IRS. These forms, the 990s, are public records. I found the Hands of Grace filings going back 5 years. At first glance, they were immaculate. The numbers were beautiful. They were clean, balanced, and perfectly logical. Donations were listed, and distribution totals matched them almost to the dollar. Administrative overhead was listed at an impossibly low percentage, a figure that would make any charity watchdog weep with joy. The documents painted a picture of a flawless, efficient, and deeply impactful organization. They were, in their own way, as carefully curated as the family photos on Sable's gallery wall. I spent a week poring over the data, comparing year over year, running the numbers against regional averages for similar-sized charities. Nothing, no red flags, no smoking gun. It was perfect. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't an error in the math or a questionable expense that gave it away. It was the perfection itself. My job is to find the signal in the noise, but here, there was no noise. Real-world logistics are messy. A pallet of donated coats gets damaged in transit. A check from a donor bounces. A volunteer accidentally logs a shipment of 200 cans of soup as 20. There are always discrepancies, write-offs, margins of error. It's the natural entropy of any human system. The Hands of Grace. Tax filings had no entropy. Every number was whole. Every column balanced to the cent. Every year. The ratio of donations to distributions was almost identical. A statistical improbability. It wasn't accounting. It was architecture. The numbers weren't a record of reality. They were a construction. They were too clean, too neat. They were beautiful, like a photoshopped image, with every blemish, every stray pixel, every trace of reality airbrushed away. They were fake. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the city lights beginning to glitter outside my window. The glass house had a paper foundation, and I had just found the first crack. Data was my way in, not charm, not connections, but the cold, hard logic of numbers. I didn't enter Northline Retail Group through the bright, welcoming lobby of marketing or merchandising. I came in through a side door, the Operational Risk Management Graduate Program, a department the company treated like a necessary but unglamorous expense, like corporate plumbing. It was perfect. Risk is the company's central nervous system. It's the place where the abstract threat of a lawsuit becomes a quantifiable expense, where the chaotic energy of a Black Friday crowd is modeled into predictable vectors of profit and potential injury. I didn't want to sell the products. I wanted to understand the machine that moved them, and I wanted to find its flaws. The corporate headquarters was a monument to friction-free efficiency. The carpets were a deep, sound-swallowing gray. The lights were recessed LEDs that bathed every corridor in a flat, shadowless glow. The air was filtered and temperature-controlled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It was an environment designed to eliminate variables, to encourage a singular focus on the bottom line. I thrived in it. The sterile quiet was a welcome antidote to the noisy chaos of my past. My direct superior was Grant Lark, the chief operating officer. Grant was a man sculpted from the same polished, unforgiving material as the building itself. He wore bespoke suits that never seemed to wrinkle and maintained a smile that was a perfect, unnerving line, as if drawn with a ruler, but his smile never touched his eyes. His eyes were the tools of his trade. They were auditor's eyes, scanning everything and everyone for inefficiencies, for deviations from the norm. He didn't see people. He saw assets, liabilities, and potential points of failure. He appreciated me for the same reason one appreciates a well-written piece of code. I was efficient, I produced clean data, and I never bothered him with sentiment. My opportunity came during the second quarter strategic review. The executive board was fixated on mitigating liability in the wake of a costly stampede incident at a competitor's store, while other department heads presented slide decks filled with vague platitudes about enhancing the customer experience. I presented a system. I call it Q-Trace, I began, my voice even and calm in the vast, silent conference room. I clicked to the first slide, A clean schematic of a typical Northline superstore. It's a proactive, data-driven approach to crowd management and asset protection. It operates on 3 integrated layers. I walk them through it, using their language, not the language of fear or memory, but of ROI and operational synergy. Layer 1. A network of high-definition cameras running predictive AI to model crowd density and flow in real time, identifying potential crush points before they form. Layer 2. A synchronized inventory system using RFID tags on all high-value pallets, ensuring what leaves the stockroom matches what's scanned at the register. Layer 3. The nervous system. A network of discrete sensors, pressure plates, magnetic seals, volumetric scanners, on every single access point, from the main entrance to the fire exits to the forgotten loading dock doors in the back. Every point of ingress and egress becomes a data point, I explained, looking directly at Grant. We'll know if a door is propped open for longer than the prescribed 60 seconds. We'll know if a pallet is moved from a secure zone without authorization. We will eliminate blind spots. We will turn every square foot of our retail space from a reactive security challenge into a proactive data stream. It reduces shrinkage, it minimizes liability, and it increases customer throughput by optimizing queue flow. It will pay for itself in 18 months. The room was silent. Grant Lark stared at the schematic on the main screen, his head tilted. The straight line of his smile was gone, replaced by an expression of intense calculation. "This is aggressive, Quinn," he said, his auditor's eyes finally turning to me. "I like it. Where do you want to test it?" I had already planted the seed. In my initial proposal, I had weighted the risk metrics for every store in the country, based on 20 years of data, historical crowd size, reported incidents, local police logs. One store consistently emerged as the highest risk, highest reward location for a pilot program. "According to the data," I said, keeping my face a mask of professional objectivity, "the logical choice is Store 347, Coldwater Heights. It has the highest historical Black Friday traffic density and the most reported incidents of disorderly conduct and asset loss in the entire company portfolio. If Q-Trace can succeed there, it can be scaled nationally with a high degree of confidence." Grant nodded slowly. "The belly of the beast," he murmured, almost to himself, then louder. "Make it happen. Quinn, I want a full deployment plan on my desk by Monday. If it works in Coldwater, you'll have the budget to put it everywhere." I gave a single, sharp nod. Understood. I walked out of the conference room, my heels making no sound on the thick gray carpet. He thought he had chosen the location. He thought he was testing my system in the harshest environment. He had no idea he was handing me the keys to Sable's castle. The place wasn't a haunt anymore. It was a laboratory, and I was about to run my experiment. The first step was protocol. Implementation of a new security and logistics system required coordination with the existing loss prevention division. I sent a standard request to Human Resources for a list of key contacts for the project. An hour later, a spreadsheet appeared in my inbox. It was a sterile list of names, titles, and corporate email addresses. I scrolled through it, my finger tracing down the screen, and then I stopped. Brandt, Theodore, Head of Loss Prevention, System-wide. The name vibrated with a strange frequency, a signal from a distant time. Theo, it couldn't be. The world wasn't that small, that neat, but the name, linked to that specific function, loss prevention, security, was too much of a coincidence. A ghost of a memory surfaced. A boy in a ridiculously oversized uniform, his face pale in the harsh light of a loading dock, holding out a can of soda like a shield, a flicker of kindness in a cold, concrete world. I had to know. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A direct approach was too risky. I couldn't just email the head of corporate security and ask if he was the same scared kid from 20 years ago. The message had to be a signal. A key cut for a lock I wasn't even sure still existed. It had to be professionally plausible but personally resonant. I typed, deleted, and typed again. Finally, I settled on the wording. 2. Brandt, northlinecorp.com, from M. Quinn, northlinecorp.com, subject, query, historical data for Q-Trace pilot, store 347, Mr. Brandt. My department is spearheading a new operational risk initiative, Q-Trace, with a pilot deployment at store 347 in Coldwater Heights. For the system calibration, we need to access historical security layouts. Specifically, I'm looking for schematics of designated off-camera zones and storage areas from the 2008 fiscal year. Can you tell me if those digital or physical archives are still accessible? Regards. Mara Quinn, Director, Operational Risk Analysis. I hit send. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a long shot. He was probably the wrong person. If he was the right person, he probably wouldn't remember. If he did remember, he probably wouldn't want to. For 2 days, there was nothing. I threw myself into the deployment plan, mapping out server requirements and installation timelines, the work a welcome distraction. On Thursday evening, just as I was packing up my briefcase, a notification chimed on my screen. The sender's name was T. Brandt. The subject line was the same as mine. The body of the email contained only 6 words. No, the archives are gone, but I have my memory. I stared at the screen, the words glowing in the dim light of my office. It was him. The boy remembered. He had received the signal. My reply was just as short. There's a coffee shop, the Daily Grind, on the corner of 6th and Madison. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. The next morning, I saw him before he saw me. He was taller, broader. The oversized uniform had been replaced by a sharply tailored suit. He looked like what he was, a corporate executive, but his eyes were the same, watchful, intelligent, and carrying a trace of an old weariness. He scanned the coffee shop, his movements economical, the way a security professional does. I raised a hand. He saw me, and for a split second, a flicker of recognition crossed his face, the executive mask dropping to reveal the boy from the loading dock. He walked over and sat down. For a few moments, we spoke the language of our jobs. He asked about Q-Trace's integration with existing alarm systems. I asked about his team's staffing levels during peak holiday seasons. It was a dance of plausible deniability. Finally, I put my coffee cup down and cut through the noise. That back door at the Coldwater store, I said, my voice low. It had a habit of sticking in the winter, a security flaw. Theo stopped stirring his own coffee. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time. The weariness was there, but so was something else, a spark. Flaws can be fixed, he said, his voice quiet but firm. If you have the right tools and the right authority to make sure the door stays shut or stays open, depending on what you need to see. We didn't need to say anything else about that day. We didn't need to mention Sable or the blood or the fear. We were 2 professionals identifying a systemic vulnerability. He was the keeper of the company's old secrets, the blind spots, the silent failures of the past. I was the architect of its future surveillance, the one with the tools and the executive mandate to put eyes and ears everywhere. Our objectives had aligned perfectly. The first phase of the sensor installation is next week, I said. My team will need full access. They'll have it, he replied without hesitation. He pushed his cup aside. Anything they need, my team will provide support. He stood up, extending a hand. I took it. His grip was firm, steady. One time, he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. Someone told me to just look away, to mind my own business. He held my gaze. I've gotten a lot better at my job since then. As he walked away, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The back door used to have one silent witness. Now, it was about to get a state-of-the-art security system, and its operator had a very, very long memory. The public face of the Hands of Grace Foundation was a masterpiece of compassionate logistics. On the Saturday after every Black Friday, local news cameras would gather in the parking lot of the Coldwater Heights Northline store to capture the heartwarming spectacle. Beaming Northline volunteers in branded fleece jackets would load a truck with boxes of toys, warm coats, and electronics, all destined for the less fortunate. Sable was always at the center, directing the operation with the serene authority of a saint, a clipboard in hand. On that clipboard was her famous list, a document she personally curated, containing the names of the pre-screened families in need. It was a touching detail, a sign that this was not a cold, corporate giveaway, but a personal mission. The charity, she often said, was about dignity, not just donations. My investigation began with that dignity. I started not with suspicion, but with a simple audit, the kind of routine cross-check my department ran all the time. I pulled 2 sets of data. First, the Northline Warehouse outbound manifests from Store 347, a precise digital record of every item palletized and scanned out as a corporate donation. Second, the receiving inventories from the Hands of Grace Distribution Center, a rented warehouse on the other side of town. The 2 datasets should have been mirror images. They were not. The discrepancy was subtle, a work of art in its own right. A pallet scanned out of Northline's system as 72 units, men's winter coats, SKU 84C, would be logged into the Hands of Grace system as 1 pallet, assorted apparel. High-end electronics would be logged out by Northline individually by serial number, but received by the charity as miscellaneous hard goods. The total pallet count matched. The total weight was always close, within a standard margin of error. It was a brilliant piece of data camouflage. To a casual observer, it was nothing more than sloppy paperwork between a corporate giant and a small, volunteer-run charity. But I saw the pattern. The specific, high-value items were the ones that consistently became vague and generic upon arrival. They were being digitally laundered. The data told me what was happening. I needed to find out how. The answer arrived on a Monday, not in a spreadsheet, but in an encrypted, anonymous email delivered to my inbox. The sender was a string of random characters from a disposable address. The message was short, paranoid, and reeked of stale coffee and fear. I worked the night shift at the Hands of Grace warehouse until 2013. Ask about the 2012 packing log, the real one, the one Sable Quinn took with her the night she visited. We had to create a new one the next day. I have a family. Don't contact me. A vanished logbook, a human witness, however terrified. It was the first crack in the digital wall. I forwarded the core of the tip, a query about security protocols during the 2012 donation window, to my new ally. I didn't need to give Theo context. He was a professional. He understood that the request was the real message. His report came back 48 hours later. It was cold, factual, and utterly damning. He had reviewed a decade of maintenance logs and surveillance archives for the Coldwater store's rear loading bay. According to the official records, the primary camera covering the charity pickup zone had suffered a series of coincidental malfunctions. In 2011, a power surge caused a 24-hour outage. In 2014, the camera was offline for a firmware upgrade. In 2016, a hard drive failure resulted in a total loss of footage for the entire week. All of these technical glitches occurred during the precise 48-hour window when the Hands of Grace trucks were being loaded. It was a statistical impossibility. It was a pattern of calculated blindness. Theo's report had an appendix. He had managed to recover the physical sign-out sheets for the corporate donations, the carbon copy forms required for any assets leaving the property. A supervisor's signature was required on each one. I zoomed in on the scanned PDF. The signature was a familiar, looping scrawl, unchanged by the years. It was the same signature that had been on my childhood report cards, on checks for my allowance, on the title of the car he bought me for my 16th birthday, Robert Quinn. My father wasn't just looking the other way. He wasn't just staying close to avoid a scene. He was holding the pen. He was signing the papers. He was an active, willing participant. The pieces were now on the board. The goods were leaving Northline, authorized by my father. They were being obscured by camera malfunctions and laundered through phantom paperwork. The final question was the destination. If the high-value items weren't going to the needy, where were they going? I started tracking the trucking company contracted by Hands of Grace. It was a small, local outfit, on paper. Their route was a simple one, from the Northline store to the charity's warehouse, but by cross-referencing GPS data with fuel purchase receipts, I found a deviation, a ghost in the machine. A significant number of the trucks made an unscheduled hour-long stop in an industrial park halfway between the two official points. They were stopping, but they weren't delivering anything. They were picking something up, or more accurately, they were dropping something off. From there, I dove into the murky ecosystem of the gray market, the online world of third-party resellers who move discontinued or overstock merchandise without official branding. It took me 3 sleepless nights, fueled by caffeine and a cold. Burning rage. I found it on a bulk lot import/export site, a seller specializing in last season Northline apparel and electronics, sold in bulk, with the tags carefully removed. The product photos matched the SKUs that had vanished from Northline's donation manifests. The seller was a registered LLC, a shell company. Its name was Mapleview Sourcing. I felt a chill spread through me, a cold that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. I ran the corporate registration. The name of the registered agent was a bland entry from a law firm that specialized in creating anonymous entities. But the address of the business, the one legally listed on the state filing, was not a PO box or a corporate suite. It was 1420 Mapleview Drive, Coldwater Heights, basement level. Sable's Wine Cellar. The charity wasn't for the needy. It was a supply chain, a sophisticated, tax-exempt trafficking operation run out of the basement of my childhood home. I compiled everything into a single, sterile document, a preliminary risk assessment memo. I laid out the facts dispassionately: the manifest discrepancies, the camera malfunctions, the duplicate signature of a Northline contractor, the circular shipping route, the shell corporation registered to a contractor's home address. I stripped out all names, all emotion. It was just data. It was a clear and present danger to the company, a multi-million-dollar liability. I marked it as urgent and sent it directly to Grant Lark. His reply came in under 5 minutes. "Ma, this is meticulous work. Let me run it past legal. G.L." A moment later, the automated notification appeared just below his message. "Your message has been forwarded to IC 74401. IC, Internal Counsel. The extension number didn't exist in the company's public directory. It was a ghost, a lawyer they kept in the shadows, a fixer. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. That night, I stayed late, planning my next move. At 9:17 p.m., my dual monitors flashed blue. A white box appeared in the center of the screen. "Your network session has been terminated by the administrator." I was logged out. I tried to log back in. Access denied. I called the 24-hour IT help desk. They were confused. They saw no record of a forced logout. They promised to escalate the ticket. It took them an hour to restore my access. When my desktop finally loaded, I opened the folder where I had saved my report. It was empty. The memo, the spreadsheets, the scanned signature pages, the links to Mapleview Sourcing, everything was gone. It hadn't just been deleted. It had been professionally scrubbed, leaving no trace in the system's recovery logs. I leaned back, the hum of the servers filling the silent office. The message was unequivocal. Grant wasn't my champion. He was the guardian at the gate. He hadn't just seen the risk I had exposed. He had seen it, recognized it, and buried it. Someone else high up at Northline had blood on their hands, and they had just shown me how far they would go to keep it hidden. They thought they had cut out the cancer, but they had forgotten about my personal backups, encrypted on a drive they didn't know existed. The next morning, I walked past my office and went to the small, rarely used printer in the marketing department on the 28th floor. I plugged in my drive and I printed everything, every last page. The stack of paper was nearly 2 inches thick. I stopped by the small employee gift shop on my way out. I bought a large circular tin, brightly decorated with cartoon reindeer and snowflakes, a Christmas cookie tin. Back at my desk, I placed the entire report inside it, the damning evidence nestled between layers of festive tissue paper. Sable always did have a sweet tooth. I, on the other hand, had developed a taste for a well-documented paper trail. With Grant Lark's digital fingerprints all over the cover-up, the game had changed. He wasn't just a bystander, he was a co-conspirator. My plan could no longer be a simple exposé. It had to be a trap, built from the very systems he had authorized, designed to catch not just the thieves, but their corporate protector. It was time to upgrade Q-Trace from a security system into a weapon. The official memo I circulated was a model of corporate efficiency. Subject: Q-Trace. Phase 2 Update. Enhanced Asset Tracking Pilot. It detailed a series of system enhancements for the Coldwater Heights store, framed in the sterile language of risk mitigation. The most significant update was for Loading Bay 3. We were installing a new RFID gateway, a large, unobtrusive frame around the door that would automatically scan every pallet that passed through. The memo stated its purpose was to ensure 100% accuracy in the reconciliation of charitable donation manifests. The second update was not in any memo. It was a custom modification, installed by a trusted two-man team from Theo's division, who worked the midnight shift and logged their hours under routine HVAC maintenance. They integrated a series of high-sensitivity, industrial-grade weight sensors directly into the concrete floor slab just inside the loading bay door. Any weight over 500 pounds crossing that threshold would now create a separate, time-stamped log entry, routed directly to a secure server that only Theo and I had access to. The door was no longer just a door. It was a scale, and it was a scanner. It was the choke point. The bait was next. We needed a Trojan horse, an offering so tempting they couldn't resist taking it. The year's must-have Christmas toy was a high-end drone called the Galaxy Voyager, a Northline exclusive that was already sold out online. I authorized a single pallet of the drones, 96 units, retail value just under $30,000, to be added to the Hands of Grace donation manifest. It was an act of corporate generosity so conspicuous it would be talked about. Sable would see it as a crowning jewel for her charitable efforts. The pallet itself looked like any other, shrink-wrapped in clear plastic, bearing the standard Northline inventory sticker. But this one was different. On the third layer down, in the dead center of the stack, one of the drone boxes was a dummy. Its weight and dimensions were identical, but inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a toy. It was a compact, self-powered GPS tracker, wired to a secondary, passive RFID chip. The RFID chip's serial number was a ghost. It wasn't in the Northline inventory system. It was a 9-digit string of characters that existed in only 2 places: a password-protected file on my encrypted hard drive and a handwritten note in Theo's wallet. This was our Judas pallet. With the hardware in place, it was time to set the stage. I drafted another internal communication, this time on behalf of the Community Relations Department. The announcement was full of praise for the incredible work of the Hands of Grace Foundation. To better facilitate their noble efforts to get these gifts to families in time for the holidays, Northline would be allowing Sable's team to pick up the donation shipment early, not on the Saturday after Black Friday, but in the dead of night, the evening before the doors opened. It would be a special pre-dawn collection to help our community partners get a head start. I routed the announcement through the proper channels, and as expected, it landed on Grant Lark's desk for final approval. Grant, I reasoned, would see this as a perfect solution. An early, unpublicized pickup would keep the most valuable part of the shipment off the books and out of sight, long before any official inventory reconciliation could take place. It looked like a generous corporate gesture while providing the perfect cover for the theft. He was helping them steal, thinking he was helping himself. His digital signature appeared on the approval form less than an hour later. G.L. Move forward. The night before Thanksgiving, as the rest of the country was brining turkeys, Theo and I were in a nondescript white utility van parked at the far end of the Northline parking lot. It was the one section of the vast asphalt expanse that Theo's historical analysis had identified as a persistent surveillance blind spot, a place where 2 of the older, roof-mounted cameras failed to overlap. Inside the van, It was cold and smelled of stale coffee. A laptop sat open on the console between us, its screen displaying the clean, minimalist interface of the Q-Trace command dashboard. My phone buzzed. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. But he called back immediately. I finally answered, my voice flat. Mara? Just wanted to see if you were coming by tomorrow. The forced, hollow cheerfulness in his voice was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. I can't. I'm working, I said. I'll be at the store tonight. System go live. Don't come by. It was an order, not a statement. There was a pause, a small hesitation filled with 20 years of unspoken truths. Okay, honey, he said finally. It's just, your mother. She's working so hard on this charity stuff. She just wants to help people. The lie was so worn, so practiced. It sounded almost like the truth. The cold fury in my chest was a familiar friend. And I said, my voice as level and sharp as a scalpel. Want to help the truth. I ended the call before he could reply. We waited. The minutes stretched into hours. The parking lot was a silent, empty sea under the orange glow of the sodium lamps. On the screen, the dashboard was a quiet grid of green status indicators. All systems normal, all doors secure. At 2:11 a.m., Theo's phone buzzed with a text from his man inside. Truck is on site. Backing up to Bay 3. My eyes were locked on the screen. I watched the system log. 2:12:47, loading bay. 3, manual override, engaged. User ID, R. Quinn. My father. Punctual as always. 02:12:51, loading bay 3, door open. I held my breath, for the trap to work. They had to take the bait. They couldn't just grab a few boxes. They had to take the whole pallet. And then, it happened. A new line of text flashed on the screen, highlighted in amber. A custom alert I had programmed myself. 2:13:19. Alert. Mass exceeds threshold. Loading bay. 3. Pallet movement detected. Weight, 1,147. LBS. Got it, Theo breathed, his voice tight. They took the whole thing. A second alert immediately followed. 2:13:21. RFID gateway. Pallet 73G4481. Departed warehouse zone. That was the official public serial number for the drone pallet. Now came the real test. Theo switched the display from the log to a satellite map of Coldwater Heights. A single blue dot, representing the truck, began to move away from the store. Let's see where he goes, I whispered. The blue dot traveled east, following the exact route to the Hands of Grace warehouse. For a horrible, stomach-lurching minute, I thought I had been wrong. Maybe they were playing it straight this one time. Maybe the drones were actually going to the charity. Wait, Theo said, pointing to the screen. He's not slowing down. The truck passed the turnoff for the warehouse, continuing on its path. It was heading north now, towards the affluent, winding roads of Mapleview Hill. Okay, I said, my heart starting to pound. I opened a new window on the dashboard, one labeled Ghost Scan. I typed in the 9-digit serial number of our hidden tracker. Ping it now. Theo hit enter. For a second, there was nothing. Then, a single red dot blinked into existence on the map. It was not on the road with the blue dot. It was stationary. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, a digital heartbeat. Next to it, the GPS software resolved the address automatically. 1420, Mapleview Drive. The red dot pulsed over the exact section of the property blueprint that I knew. From a childhood of being told never to go there, was my stepmother's climate-controlled wine cellar. Target acquired, Theo said, his voice devoid of all emotion. Queue cleared, I replied, the words tasting like victory and ash. The truck was just a decoy now, a shell game. The prize, the evidence, was already home. The drive from the industrial park to Mapleview Hill was 5 miles of silent, coiled tension. The white utility van was a ghost, its headlights cutting through the sleeping, manicured streets of Coldwater Heights. Theo drove with an unnerving calm, his eyes scanning, processing, missing nothing. I sat in the passenger seat, the festive cookie tin a cold, heavy weight on my lap. On a small tablet mounted to the dash, a single red dot pulsed with metronomic certainty over a satellite image of the glass house. It was lit up like a terrarium, a beacon of false warmth in the pre-dawn chill. We didn't go to the front door. We parked a block away and approached on foot, our shoes silent on the damp grass. Theo led the way to a side entrance, a heavy oak door set into the stone foundation that led, I knew, directly to the basement level, to the wine cellar. A low hum emanated from the wall, the climate control system, working to protect Sable's precious vintages and, tonight, her stolen goods. My heart was a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs, a counterpoint to the steady digital pulse of the tracker. Theo put a hand on the heavy iron handle of the door and glanced at me, his eyes dark in the shadows. His voice was a bare whisper, lost in the hum of the machinery. "Ready?" I gave a single, sharp nod. He turned the handle. It wasn't locked. They had grown arrogant, comfortable in their glass house, never imagining a threat could come from anywhere but the front door. He pushed it open a few inches, a sliver of warm, dry air spilling out into the night. Inside, the light was dim, casting long shadows from the towering racks of wine bottles, and there was movement. Theo pushed the door fully open, and we stepped inside, the heavy wood closing silently behind us. They didn't hear us. They were 20 feet away, completely absorbed in their work. The Judas pallet, its shrink wrap torn away, sat in the center of the room. My father, Robert, was on his knees, clumsily breaking down the Northline branded cardboard boxes, his movements jerky and panicked. Sable, however, worked with a calm, methodical grace. She was taking the individual drone boxes and placing them into larger, elegantly designed cartons stenciled with the gold, cursive logo of the Hands of Grace Foundation. She was a meticulous artist, erasing one identity and bestowing another. They were a well-oiled machine of fraud. I took 3 steps forward. My hand found the light switch on the wall. I flipped it. The room was flooded with the harsh, flat glare of industrial fluorescent tubes Sable had installed for cataloging purposes. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Robert cried out, dropping a box and scrambling to his feet like a startled animal. He stared at me, his face a pathetic mask of shock and terror, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Sable was different. She didn't flinch. She simply straightened up slowly, placing a roll of packing tape on the large oak tasting table. She turned to face me, and her expression moved through 3 distinct phases in under 2 seconds. Mild surprise, then profound annoyance, and finally, it settled into the familiar, weaponized condescension she had perfected over decades. A small, cold smile touched her lips. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, her voice dripping with mock amusement. "Kiddo, are you really going to make another scene?" I didn't answer her. I didn't look at my father, who was visibly trembling. Instead, I walked to the other end of the long oak table. I placed the Christmas cookie tin on the polished wood surface. The metallic sound echoed in the suddenly silent cellar. With deliberate, slow movements, I lifted the lid. I didn't dump the contents out. I curated the evidence, just as she had curated her life. I laid the papers out one by one, like a dealer laying out a hand of cards. First, the Northline outbound manifest, with the drone pallet clearly itemized. Second, the falsified Hands of Grace inbound manifest, where the drones had become miscellaneous electronics. Third, a printout of the satellite map, showing the truck's route, the red line deviating sharply from its official destination, and last, a live screenshot from the tablet in the van, showing the pulsing red dot of our tracker. Its location was pinpointed by a digital flag, the address in bold letters beside it. 1820 Mapleview Drive. Sable stared at the paper trail, her cold smile finally faltering. My father looked like he was going to be sick. "It's over," I said, my voice as flat and cold as the concrete floor. "Is it?" a new voice asked, a voice that did not belong. From the deep shadows behind a towering rack of vintage Bordeaux, a figure stepped into the light. He was holding a half-full glass of red wine. He was not surprised. He was not panicked. He looked, if anything, bored. It was Grant Lark. He took a slow sip of his wine, his auditor's eyes scanning the scene, assessing the new variables. He looked at the papers on the table, at Sable's face, at my father's crumbling composure, and finally, at me. The straight, perfect line of his smile returned. "A private matter." "Quinn," he said, his voice a smooth, calm baritone that cut through the tension. "As you can see, I am here as a guest, not as a representative of Northline. I have a small, personal investment in a friend's sourcing venture. It has nothing to do with the company. Northline has complete and total plausible deniability." He was already building the firewall, severing the connection in real time. He was containing the damage. My father, desperate for a lifeline, seized on Grant's words. "He said it was just business." "Mara," Robert stammered, his eyes wide and pleading. "A way to optimize dead inventory." That was his phrase, optimizing dead inventory. Grant's smile tightened. He had given my father the corporate jargon, the anesthetic language to soothe whatever remained of his conscience, and now the fool was repeating it like a confession. Theo, who had been standing silently by the door, took a single, deliberate step forward into the light. He held his phone in his hand, its screen dark, its microphone live since the moment the cellar door had opened. I ignored my father. I ignored Sable. My eyes were locked on Grant. "When I sent you my report," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, "the one you erased from my system, who did you forward it to? Which ghost in internal counsel?" Grant actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He swirled the wine in his glass. "To my lawyer, of course," he said. He took another sip and placed the glass on the table next to my evidence, a declaration of his untouchability. "And now," he said, looking from me to Theo and back again, "we negotiate. I'm sure we can come to a very generous arrangement, a promotion, a severance package. Your choice." He thought this was a boardroom. He thought he could buy his way out. He thought he was in control. I didn't answer him. I simply broke his gaze and looked at Theo. I raised an eyebrow, a silent question. Theo met my look, and the barest hint of a smile touched his lips. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He turned his calm, watchful eyes back to Grant Lark. "I don't think you understand the situation," Theo said, his voice steady and clear. "We have more ears on this conversation than just the ones in this room." Theo's words dropped into the wine cellar's sterile silence like a stone into a deep well. "We have more ears on this conversation than just the ones in this room." Grant Lark's composure, the unshakable mask of a COO, finally fractured. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine, raw panic in his auditor's eyes. Sable's face went rigid, the blood draining from it, leaving behind a waxy, doll-like pallor. In the utility van parked a block away, Theo's two-person team hadn't just been recording. They had been live-streaming the audio feed to a secure server, with a courtesy link forwarded to Detective Miller of the Coldwater County Financial Crimes Unit. This was not a negotiation. This was the reading of their rights, delivered in corporate speak. "So here is my counteroffer," I said, my voice cutting through the thick silence. "There will be no quiet severance package. There will be no internal investigation that gets buried. Instead, we are going to give Northline the biggest PR win of the holiday season." I laid it out for them, the pieces of my real trap, at 6 p.m., just before the Black Friday early bird opening, right here in the parking lot of this very store. Northline would host the first annual Hands of Grace charity kickoff celebration. It would be a grand public spectacle, a testament to Northline's deep commitment to the community, and Grant and Sable, as the respective pillars of the corporate and charitable worlds, would be the guests of honor. Grant stared at me, his mind racing, processing the angles. He saw his escape route. A public event would allow him to get in front of the story. He could play the part of the magnanimous executive, the patron of this beloved local charity. When the fraud was inevitably exposed, he could position Northline as the primary victim, a trusting corporate partner betrayed by a rogue foundation. It was a desperate, high-risk gambit, but it was the only play he had left. "Humane branding," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's a strong angle." He nodded. Sable's reason for agreeing was simpler. It was pure, uncut narcissism. The thought of a camera, a stage, a crowd, it was a drug she couldn't refuse. In her mind, this was still a performance she could control. She believed, with the unshakable faith of the truly self-absorbed, that she could smile her way out of anything, that her public mask was invincible. She saw a stage, and she had to be on it. 3 hours later, the parking lot was transformed. A temporary stage had been erected, flanked by massive speaker stacks and backed by a giant LED screen that flashed the Northline and Hands of Grace logos. Cheesy holiday music blared, battling with the excited roar of 1,000 shoppers already lined up for the doorbuster deals. News vans from 3 local affiliates had their satellite dishes pointed at the sky. It was a perfectly orchestrated circus. Backstage, in a small, tense tent, the air was thick with unspoken fear. Grant was on his phone, barking at some unseen lawyer. Sable was having her makeup touched up, her face a serene, smiling mask that didn't quite hide the frantic terror in her eyes. I approached them, playing the part of the efficient event coordinator. "Just need to get you both mic'd up," I said. The parking lot spectacle was a controlled demolition. By the time the sun rose on Black Friday, the story was already dominating the local news cycle. But it wasn't the story Grant or Sable had expected. It was a story of corporate malfeasance exposed, of a beloved charity revealed as a hollow shell. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Northline's stock took a predictable, though recoverable, hit in pre-market trading. The company's PR department went into crisis mode, issuing a statement that they were shocked and appalled and had launched an immediate and thorough internal investigation. That investigation began at 9 a.m. sharp, not in some dusty records room, but in the glass-walled apex of the Northline Tower, the main executive conference room on the 42nd floor. The room was a sterile bubble of pressurized air and panoramic city views. I sat at one end of the long, obsidian black table. Across from me sat Grant Lark. He looked as if he hadn't slept, but his suit was, as always, immaculate. Flanking him were 2 of Northline's senior corporate attorneys, a man and a woman whose faces were expensive, neutral masks. At the far end of the table, observing everything with a predatory stillness, were 2 individuals who did not work for Northline. They were from the state's Financial Crimes Division, a man with tired eyes and a woman with a pen that never stopped moving. Theo had made sure the right invitations were sent. Grant initiated the proceedings. He was a man fighting a war on a battlefield he no longer controlled, but he would not surrender the first volley. He slid a slim leather-bound folder across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of me. "Let's dispense with the theatrics. Quinn," he began, his voice a low, controlled rumble of authority. "You've made your point. You've created a significant problem for this company, and, I'll admit, for me personally, but we are all professionals here. We understand that problems have solutions." I didn't touch the folder. I just looked at him. "Inside that folder," he continued, a thin, humorless smile on his face, "you will find a contract. It offers you the newly created position of Executive Vice President of Global Risk Strategy, a 7-figure salary, a significant block of vested stock options. In return, you will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and you will turn over every piece of original data you have collected, every file, every recording, every backup. The investigation will conclude that the fraud was contained entirely within the Hands of Grace Foundation, orchestrated by the Quinns. Northline will be positioned as the victim, and you will be hailed as the sharp-eyed executive who uncovered it. Everyone gets what they want." It was a brilliant move. He wasn't just offering me a bribe. He was offering me my own narrative, gift-wrapped and tied with a golden bow. He was offering me everything I had fought for, on his terms. The lawyers watched me, their faces unreadable. The investigators watched me, their expressions unwavering. I finally reached out, but not for his folder. I placed my own document on the table. It was a simple, spiral-bound report, not leather. Its cover was plain white, bearing a single stamped title, Project Q-Trace, Phase 3 Audit. "This is a different kind of contract. Grant," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room. I pushed it toward the center of the table, an offering to the lawyers, not to him. "It's an agreement I finalized last night with an independent, third-party auditing firm, one that specializes in corporate fraud and has a long-standing relationship with the SEC. The lead attorney, the man, tentatively reached out and pulled the report towards him. He opened it. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he read the first page. "As of 3 a.m. this morning," I continued, my gaze fixed on the lawyers, "every piece of original data related to this case, the full, unedited audio from the cellar, the complete Q-Trace logs, the GPS tracking data, the financial analyses of Mapleview sourcing, and all related communications, was time-stamped, cryptographically signed, and uploaded to a secure, off-site, triple-redundant cloud server. That server is under the exclusive legal control of the auditing firm. It is beyond Northline's reach. It is beyond my reach. It is, for all intents and purposes, in escrow. The data cannot be erased or altered by anyone." The female lawyer leaned over to read the document with her partner. I saw the subtle shift in her posture, the tightening of her jaw. They were no longer looking at this as Grant's problem. They were looking at it as a corporate existential threat. They were lawyers. Their job wasn't to protect the COO. Their job was to protect the company. And I had just shown them that Grant Lark was now the single greatest liability on their balance sheet. The male lawyer looked up, not at me, but at Grant. The neutral mask was gone. His expression was pure, cold calculation. "Grant," he said, his voice clipped, "did you know about this?" Grant saw the shift. He saw his allies becoming his judges, cornered. He did what all cornered animals do. He attacked. He pushed back from the table and stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is a farce. This is a personal vendetta. Her name is Mara Quinn. She is the stepdaughter of the two individuals who were arrested last night. This entire elaborate fiction is a pathetic attempt to settle a decades-old family score. She has a clear and undeniable conflict of interest. She has abused her position and company resources to fabricate a conspiracy for the sole purpose of destroying her family. Every piece of her so-called evidence is tainted. It's inadmissible." It was his last shot, and he fired it with everything he had. The investigators looked at me, their expressions unchanged, waiting. The lawyers looked at me, a flicker of hope in their eyes that Grant might have just handed them a legal escape hatch. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small tablet. I placed it on the table and tapped the screen. A video file opened. It was a simple, shaky shot of a parking lot at night. The audio crystal clear, captured by the lapel microphone Grant had worn so willingly. His own voice filled the conference room, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly self-incriminating. "This is just business, Mara. A way to optimize dead inventory." That was his phrase, optimizing dead inventory. The audio continued, playing back his words from the wine cellar, his casual admission of his investment in Mapleview sourcing, his attempt to negotiate a cover-up. It was all there, in his own voice, a confession delivered with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. The male investigator, the one with the tired eyes, slowly reached out and closed his laptop. The click of the latch was as loud as a gunshot. He looked at his partner. She nodded once, then closed her own notebook. "I believe we have enough for the warrant," he said, his voice quiet, matter of fact. The battle was over, The war was won. I turned my gaze away from Grant's ashen, defeated face and looked directly at Northline's legal counsel. I offered them the only lifeline they had left. "The company can survive this," I said, my voice devoid of triumph, a simple statement of fact. "It might even come out stronger, but only if it publicly and proactively cooperates with the investigation. Full transparency. Starting right now." The two lawyers exchanged a look. It was a conversation that lasted less than a second, but communicated volumes. They were jettisoning the dead weight. They were saving the ship. "We agree," the female lawyer said, her voice firm. "Northline will cooperate fully." I looked past them, at Grant. He had sunk back into his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. He was staring at his own reflection in the vast, floor-to-ceiling window, a distorted, wavering image against the backdrop of the city he once thought he commanded. From my angle, the precise lines of the window's steel mullions intersected his reflection perfectly, fracturing his face into a dozen broken pieces. He looked like a man made of cracked glass. The fallout was not a storm. It was a series of precise, controlled demolitions. Each one targeted a different pillar of the glass house, and each one brought a section of the fraudulent architecture crashing down. The first to fall was Sable. Her arrest was a masterpiece of public humiliation, a perfectly framed shot for the 6 o'clock news. It didn't happen in the privacy of her home, but in front of the hands of Grace Warehouse, the very symbol of her manufactured compassion. The cameras were already there, ostensibly for a follow-up on the previous night's disruption. They caught it all. They caught the two plainclothes detectives approaching her as she was directing a confused-looking volunteer. They caught the quiet murmur of their words, her incredulous, sharp laugh, and the slow, dawning horror on her face as she realized this was not a performance she could control. She didn't scream or struggle. She was too proud for that. She simply went rigid, her face a mask of cold, venomous fury, as one of the detectives took her arm and placed the handcuffs behind her back. The most damning shot, the one that would be replayed for days, was of her being placed in the back of the unmarked sedan. As the door closed, the gold, cursive logo on the warehouse wall, the word Grace, was reflected in the car's tinted window. The letters warped and inverted, a perfect visual metaphor for her entire existence. The second pillar, Robert, crumbled not with a bang, but with a whimper. He was never a man of conviction, only of convenience. Faced with the mountain of evidence, his signature on the manifests, his presence in the cellar, his panicked confession on the audio recordings, he folded completely. He was offered a deal, a choice between a long, brutal sentence for racketeering and a much shorter one in a minimum security facility, in exchange for his complete and total cooperation. As the prompt stated, he chose the lighter prison sentence over an empty honor. I imagined him in a sterile, beige room, the air smelling of stale coffee and desperation. I imagined his hand, the same hand that had once held mine in a Black Friday crowd, now trembling as he signed away his life, his loyalty, and the last vestiges of his self-respect. He had spent a lifetime staying close to avoid a scene, and in the end, he created the biggest one of all by simply telling the truth. Grant Lark, the corporate pillar, was insulated by layers of lawyers and plausible deniability, but not even he could withstand the blast. The story broke in the financial press not as a local charity scandal, but as a case study in corporate negligence. The headlines were brutal and efficient. Northline COO suspended amid ghost charity probe, Lark's personal assets, frozen pending investigation. The article detailed his personal investment in Mapleview sourcing, his attempts to suppress the internal investigation, his damning words caught on tape. He wasn't just a bad actor. He was a fiduciary cancer. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, cut him out like a tumor. He was suspended indefinitely, his corporate credit cards canceled, his access to the 42nd floor revoked. He became a ghost in the machine he had helped to build. In the midst of the chaos, my own transformation was quiet, digital, and deeply ironic. An email arrived in my inbox. its subject line a masterpiece of corporate understatement. Organizational update. The memo announced Grant's suspension and, in the final paragraph, stated that I, Mara Quinn, had been appointed acting vice president of risk management, effective immediately. My first official mandate, the email explained, was to form and lead a new charity compliance initiative, a task force designed to overhaul Northline's philanthropic partnerships and ensure that a betrayal of this magnitude could never happen again. They were paying me to build a fortress on the rubble of a battlefield I had just leveled. It wasn't a reward. It was a calculated, strategic move to restore investor confidence. I was a tool, just as Q-Trace had been a tool. But this time, I was the one holding it. That evening, long after the last employee had fled the building, I took the elevator down, not to the lobby, but to the service level. I walked through the quiet, humming corridors of the stockroom until I reached the back of the store. I pushed open the heavy gray metal door and stepped out into the cold night air of the loading dock. It was just a space, a rectangle of concrete and steel under a single, caged bulb. But for me, it had been a place of immense power, a wound in time that had never fully healed. I reached out and laid my palm flat against the cold, corrugated metal of the bay door. The air smelled of diesel and damp cardboard, the same smells from 20 years ago. And then I felt it, a faint, familiar tingling from the scar behind my ear. It wasn't a throb of pain. It was more like a phantom limb, a ghost of a sensation, acknowledging the place of its birth one last time before fading completely. It was a farewell. I heard a soft sound behind me and turned. Theo was standing there, leaning against a stack of empty pallets, his hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watched me. Then he walked over to a small, battered wooden crate that served as a makeshift table for the night crew. He placed a small, white cardboard box upon it. He pushed it gently towards me. It was a standard-issue box of adhesive bandages. "I figured I owed you a replacement," he said, his voice quiet. He nodded towards my scar. "For the one you never got. This one is for the final cut." It was a gesture so small, so simple, yet it held the weight of 2 decades of silence. It was an acknowledgement of a shared memory, a debt of kindness finally paid. I picked up the box, its weight insignificant in my hand. "Thank you, Theo," I said. It was all that needed to be said. Later, back in my car, parked under the sterile glow of a parking lot lamp, I pulled out my phone. I had one last piece of business, one final door to close. I typed out a short, simple message to my father. "I'm safe. I'm not coming home to Mapleview again." I hit send. His reply came back almost instantly, as if he had been waiting, holding the phone in his hand. It was only 2 words, the same 2 words that had been the mantra of my childhood, the code for his cowardice, the theme of his life. "Stay close." A wave of something, not anger, not sadness, just a profound and weary finality, washed over me. He would never get it. He would never understand that staying close was the poison, the disease, the cage. He was a prisoner of his own making, and he would die in that cell. My fingers moved with a calm certainty. I typed my reply. "No, I'm going to stand far back, far enough to see everything clearly." I sent the message, then, without hesitation, I opened his contact information. My thumb hovered over the screen for a single, quiet moment. Then I pressed the button. Block this caller. A small, insignificant action in the grand scheme of things, a few lines of code executed on a distant server, but it was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a heavy gray metal door finally, definitively, and forever swinging shut. Monday morning did not feel like a victory. It felt like a system reboot. The Northline Tower was unnervingly quiet. The usual hum of commerce replaced by a low murmur of whispered conversations in corridors and hushed gatherings around coffee machines. The scandal was a virus, and the corporate body was attempting to purge it through gossip and speculation. I walked through it all, an island of calm in the nervous sea. My new office was on the same floor as Grant's old one. a corner suite with 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling glass. It smelled of new carpet and industrial cleaner. The first thing I did was power on the large monitor on my desk and log into the Q-Trace command dashboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying a national map dotted with the green status indicators of hundreds of Northline stores. I zoomed in, the satellite image sharpening until it was focused on a single, unremarkable building in Coldwater Heights. I pulled up the diagnostic log for Store 347. The data flowed in a clean, predictable stream. Customer throughput was optimal. Checkout queues were balanced. Every door, every sensor, reported normal status. I scrolled back through the weekend's logs. The data was a river of green text, a testament to a system operating within its designated parameters. There were no more amber alerts from the loading dock. No more ghost pallets triggering weight sensors in the dead of night. The anomalies had been identified, isolated, and removed. The system was clean. At 10 a.m., there was an all-hands meeting, a mandatory video conference for all corporate-level employees. It was meant to be a show of stability, a message from the board that the ship was being righted. The interim CEO, a stoic woman from the legal department, spoke for 15 minutes in calm, measured tones about corporate responsibility, shareholder value, and the company's unwavering commitment to ethical practices. It was a speech designed to anesthetize, to smooth over the raw, gaping wound with the bland ointment of corporate jargon. Then, she introduced me. To lead our new compliance initiative, I've appointed Mara Quinn as Acting Vice President of Risk Management. Mara will now say a few words. Thousands of faces, small squares on the massive conference room screen, turned to me. They were expecting a detailed plan, a multi-point strategy, a slide deck full of reassuring charts and graphs. They were expecting a continuation of the anesthesia. I stood up and walked to the podium. I looked into the camera, a single, unblinking black eye that connected me to the entire nervous system of the company. I didn't have a speech. I had a single sentence. Our job is not to optimize trash, I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the vast, silent room. Our job is to take out the trash. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The faces on the screen were frozen, a mosaic of confusion and surprise. Then, from the back of the conference room, a single person began to clap. It was a junior analyst from my old department. Another joined in, then another. The sound grew. A wave of applause that was less about celebration and more about a collective, cathartic release. They weren't just clapping for me. They were clapping because someone had finally spoken a language other than corporate doublespeak. They were clapping for the truth. I didn't smile. I simply stood and watched my own reflection in the dark surface of the monitor in front of me. The applause was a dull, roaring sound, and in the glass, I could see the faint, silver line behind my ear. A ghost image superimposed over the data streams of the company I now helped to lead. It was barely visible, faded, an old receipt for a debt that had finally been paid in full. Back in my new office, the silence was a welcome relief. I stood by the window, looking down at the city, a sprawling, intricate network of systems, of cause and effect. My phone, which had been on silent, vibrated on the polished surface of my new desk. It was a push notification from a major financial news network. Arrest warrant for former Northline COO Grant Lark executed at 10:32 SOM Est. The final data point, the closing entry in the log. I watched the notification for a long moment. Then I reached over and powered the phone off completely. I didn't need to read the article. I didn't need to see the analysis or the commentary. I had written the story. I already knew how it ended. I looked out the window again, down at the streets below, at the endless flow of traffic, the anonymous crowds. My gaze drifted east, towards the distant suburbs, towards a parking lot where, just a few nights ago, the world had been a chaotic stage of flashing lights and desperate bargains. It all seemed very small from up here, very far away. My personal laptop, sitting on the corner of the desk, chimed softly. It was a single, Encrypted message. From Theo. The words were simple, a piece of professional shorthand that held the weight of our shared history. The line is clear. He was telling me the last of the legal formalities were done. The warrants were served. The evidence was logged. The operation was complete. But I knew what he really meant. The path was open. The obstruction was gone. The threat was neutralized. I sat down in my new leather chair. It still felt foreign, unyielding. I typed back my reply, the final entry in our private log. Queue cleared. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop. The screen went dark. A perfect, silent, impenetrable black. The color of a loading dock in the moments just before the dawn of Black Friday. Nothing more needed to be said. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It means the world to have you here, to keep the conversation going. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled and hear your thoughts on Mara's journey. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. And for extra support, hit that hype button to help this story be heard by even more people. Your support makes all of this possible.